Okay, today I'm going to show you how to make a weighted blanket, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to create an inside pocket, if you may, of fabric that's going to hold the beans, and then we're going to have two separate exterior fabrics. Before we begin, we need to figure out what size blanket we want to make and how many pounds we would like the blanket to be. For this project, I have decided that I am going to make a 45 by 70 inch blanket, and I have decided that I would like my blanket to be 5 pounds, and I choose to do 3 by 3 inch squares. The reason for that is because the small squares kind of help the beans or the poly pellets from shifting too much, and that creates a even weight distribution within the blanket. For this project, I am going to measure out my poly pellet in grams, and the reason for that is having the 3 by 3 inch squares, we are not going to use very many of the pellets per square, and that's going to give us a more accurate weight per square for the poly pellets. So what I need to figure out first is how many grams are in 1 pound, and that's what this number right here is. This is how many grams are in 1 pound. So I am going to take this number right here and I'm going to multiply it by 5 because we're making a 5 pound blanket, and that's going to give us this number right here. So this is how many grams are going to be in our 5 pound blanket. So now that we've got that figured out, we need to figure out how many rows, both horizontally and vertically, we are going to make in our blanket. And in order to do that, we are going to take 70 and we're going to divide it by 3, and that is going to give us our horizontal rows, which ends up being 23 rows. Then we're going to take that 45 again and we're going to divide that by 3, and that will give us our vertical rows, and that ends up being 15 rows. So we are going to have 15 vertical rows and we're going to have 23 horizontal rows. Now that we've figured that out, we need to figure out how many squares, 3 by 3 inch squares, are going to be in the blanket total. Now, in order to do that, we are going to take our 15 rows here, and we are going to multiply that by 23. Now, if you do that, you actually end up with a bigger number than what I have here. And the reason for that is the exterior row of the blanket, both top and bottom and both of the sides, we are not going to fill with pellets because I am going to put a satin trim on the blanket. So with our final number that we have taken 15 multiplied by 23, we are going to subtract then 23, 23, 15, and 15, and that will end up giving us our 269 squares total. Now, in order to figure out how much weight per square, we are going to take our we are going to take our 269 and we are going to divide that by our total, our 5 pound blanket total, and that is going to give us 8.43 grams per square. Again, you take 269, your total amount of squares, and you're going to divide that by the total weight of the blanket. Again, this is in grams. That gives us 8.43 grams per square. Now, after we've done all of our math and all of our figuring, the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to mark out on your fabric your grid of 3 by 3 inch squares. Now, the fabric I chose to use was a muslin fabric. I got 2 yards of it to make up the 70 inches, and the fabric is actually 46 inches wide, so we ended up having to trim an inch off. I got a pen and I got my yardstick and I sat down and I marked off my vertical rows, and then I marked off my horizontal rows until I ended up with 269 3 by 3 inch squares. When you are finished marking off your fabric, it's going to look very much like the paper, where each square represents a 3 by 3 inch square. Okay, for our next step, after you've figured out the weight and the squares and everything of your blanket, and you have sat down and you've taken your top piece of fabric and you've marked off your grid for your 3x3 inch squares, you should end up with something very similar to what's pictured here. You have just your sheet of fabric with a bunch of squares written on it. Now, like I said before, I chose to use a muslin fabric. There's going to be a front piece and a back piece. You only need to mark one side. You are going to take those two pieces of fabric and you are going to place them together. Now, when you go out and you get your fabric, if you choose to get muslin or whatever, make sure that you are doubling the total length of your blanket, because like I said, you want this to be a front and back. So after you've marked off your grid on your top piece of muslin, you are going to place the two pieces together. Now it's time to start sewing. After you've placed your two pieces of fabric together, you want to have the grid side up on your sewing machine so you can see what you're doing. And what you're going to do is you're going to follow your grid lines and you're going to sew all of your vertical lines, just your vertical. And you're going to start with all of your vertical lines and continue across the entire width of your muslin fabric until you've gotten all of your vertical lines sewed. After that, you are going to come down to your bottom and you are going to sew your bottom closed. You want to leave your top open because that is where you need to fill with your poly pellets. I just wanted to go over real quick with you what the poly pellets look like that we're going to be filling this blanket with. I know I often refer to them as beans, but we're not actually putting beans in this blanket. These are a small, smooth, fairly lightweight pellet that is most importantly machine washable. So when you get done with your blanket, you will be able to put it in the washer. You may end up having to use a commercial washing machine depending on the weight of your blanket, so I would definitely recommend checking your instruction manual for your washer at home to determine the weight limit before putting your blanket in your washer, because you don't want to damage it. But another good trick I like to use is after you have used your scale and weighed out each per square amount of these poly pellets, go ahead to your kitchen and find a measuring spoon that will accommodate that amount exactly or almost exactly, whether it's a teaspoon, a tablespoon. That will make the process go so much faster. You won't have to weigh each individual square. As I mentioned before, I have 269 squares, so I don't want to have to weigh out 269 squares every time. So I've found a measuring spoon that is the exact right amount of poly pellets by weight. So that made the process go a whole lot faster. Now this is my 2 sheets of, I chose muslin fabric. As you can see, the last row right here is not sewn together and it is not filled. It is the same if you go over to the other side here. This side is open, it is not closed. You can see the lines that I have written to mark out each of my 3x3 inch squares, and you see I've started filling them with beans. Okay, now this is the top of our fabric here, and as you can see it is open to allow me to fill for the beans, but each side has been showed, as I explained to you earlier, sewing the vertical rows closed. So each square has an opening in the top, and what you're wanting to do here is across the entire width of the blanket, you take your measured out poly pellets and you're going to pour in each row until you get across the entire width of the blanket. So take your per square weighed out amount of poly pellets and you're going to, you know, open the top here, you're going to pour it in, you're going to move to the next one, you're going to pour it in, you're going to move to the next one, you're going to pour it in. After you've gotten that all the way across the entire width of the blanket, you're going to want to stand up and give it a little bit of shake to get all those pellets to fall down to the bottom. Okay, I have filled my row all the way across with my poly pellets and I'm ready to start sewing. pellets are here in the pouch, and you can see my lines that I have marked off for each 3x3 inch square. Now, before you start sewing, you're going to want to run your finger pushing the poly pellets down away from the foot of your sewing machine. You really don't want to run one of these suckers over. Sometimes they get stuck a little up at the top of the blanket, so again, just push them down until you get them all the way into the pocket. You can see the stitch right here from the pocket before this one, so they're going to stop right there and just keep them away from the foot of my machine. Now, when you're sewing, of course, make sure that you use your back stitch to seal the row. This is definitely not something that you want coming undone. Now, as you move down the width of the blanket, you are going to continue to feel for these little pellets. They definitely like to get stuck. I stop right before I start a new square, and see there's some pellets up here, so I'm going to slide those back down and get those away from the foot of my machine here. So I have all them away. This is nice and smooth, so I am going to continue sewing this pocket closed. Not sure if you can see that, but there's actually a little one stuck right here under the foot. You can get these out, push them out of the way. You'll definitely be able to see if you get one stuck there, but you want to catch it before you get to this stitch here, otherwise it has no place to go, and odds are you'll end up breaking your needle. So again, we continue following the line that I have written out and stopping before we get to our next square, and we can feel all the pellets are up here where they're not supposed to be, so you are going to slide them down, and once you have them all into the pocket, you're going to continue sewing, and continue that all the way across the width of the blanket, making sure to feel for any pellets that might be in the way of the foot of your machine before you run them over. And it's really just wash, rinse, repeat after that. You know, you take each individual measurement per square of your poly pellets. You're going to pour them in the top of the blanket, and once you've gotten all the way across the width of the blanket, you are going to put it under the machine and you're going to sew it closed. Like I said, my blanket ended up having 269 squares, so you know, I have to fill 269 squares. So across each square, like I said, I ended up having, 23 rows. So, you know, I'm going to end up sewing 23 rows closed. So this is definitely the most tedious part of this blanket, is just fill and sew your row closed, and fill again, and sew that row closed, and keep going and keep going and keep going until you get to the top of the blanket. Okay, this is still that same row. I am just coming to the end of it. I just wanted to show you so you can see my row here that is open, that I have decided that I don't want to close or fill with beans. So I have already cleared all of the beans out of the way of my foot here, and I'm going to continue sewing. And as I get to the end here, just like in the beginning, you want to make sure you use your back stitch. I like to do it 3 or 4 times just to make sure. And that would be one complete row. Okay, now we are finished making our squares on the fabric. As you can see, all the squares are finished, the beans are filled. Our next step is our exterior fabrics. That is what the purple is here. What you're going to do is lay it out, and you are going to place your top fabric over your bean fabric, and Then you are going to take your second top fabric, which is what this is going to be. Now we are going to sew this inside out, so you are going to want both right sides facing each other at this point. Okay, now that's what I've done. I have laid my other top fabric over the purple, and it is wrong side up. And what I am going to do is I'm going to take pins, and I'm going to pin along the entire circumference, pinning all three pieces of fabric together. The fabric containing your poly squares, the one side of your exterior and the other side of your exterior. Okay, after you have pinned all the way around your blanket, pinning all the layers together, then you're gonna want to go to your edges, and it's a good time to trim off any excess that you have. Our purple plush fabric here was actually about 60 inches wide, so that was quite a bit wider than our blanket total, so we trim that off and then go ahead and sew all the way around your blanket. And what you're going to want to do though is somewhere along one of the edges you're going to want to leave a fairly generous sized gap. Now the reason for that is we are sewing this blanket inside out, so we need to turn it right side out. After you have finished all of your sewing, go ahead and find your corner that you've left open, and you're going to stick your arm in there and reach for the opposite corner all the way over at the end and pull it right side out. Alright, after you have sewn around your edges and turned your blanket right side out, you should end up with something like this. Now, if you turn it over here, here is our plush side and our flannel side here. And over here, we have our hole that we had left for turning the blanket right side out. Alright, we're getting there. We're almost done. Here is our right side out blanket, and this is our open seam. As you see over here, here's the corner that's been stitched closed, and here is the other end that's been stitched closed. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold these rough edges inside here until it looks very much like the rest of the blanket where it has been sewn on the edges. And what you're going to do after you get all that tucked is you are going to do probably a 1/4 inch from the edge. You're going to sew that closed, and I would recommend doing that all the way around the blanket, so that will keep your two layers here separate, and you won't end up having, you know, one come over the front or the back or anything like that. So tuck your edges in here until they look nice and pretty, and close them up. You can pin them here if you want to, and run it through the machine. Okay, this is not done, but this is just one edge that I've finished. I'm not going to claim my lines are super straight because they're not. But this will give you an idea of what your edge will look like after you've done that, you know, about a 1/4 stitch along the edge. And if you choose not to put the trim on your blanket, then once you've sewn this all the way around the blanket, then that's it. Your blanket's done, and good job. Okay, so if you chose to put the trim on the blanket, here is our next step. This is a pre-cut, pre-folded, already made nice lime green trim that we're putting on the blanket. Now I have learned that one side of the trim is actually a little bit longer than the other side, and the reason for that is if you put the longer side here on the back of your fabric, then that will ensure as you're going through that the needle grabs that back fabric, so you don't end up having you know, the top part sewn on and the bottom side is loose. Now we are doing a nice zigzag stitch here. I've already started on this. Now the reason that it doesn't matter if this line here is straight is because I am just following the edge right here with my foot, so that's going to create a nice straight even edge and it'll look all pretty when we're done. Now when I started, I actually started about halfway at the top of the fabric. You don't want to start on the corner, and I'll show you how to finish that as we get to it. But I've already started and we are approaching the corner here. We're about to make our turn, and I am going to show you how to make a nice pretty corner. Okay, so we are about to make our turn. I have pinned our trim in place here. And what you are going to do here is take your trim and make a 90-degree turn around the corner with it. You're going to fold the top and the bottom over your fabric. And you're going to take your second pin here and you are going to pin it. So this is about what you should have. You got a pin up here holding this, you got a pin over here holding this one. My foot here is still on track. I have the needle down, so it's not going anywhere. So go ahead and take this top pin out right here, and you are going to take one end here and tuck it in ever so nicely and turn over to the back side, and you're going to do the same deal. Which seems to be a little bit trickier than the top side. Okay, so now that we have our corners nicely tucked in, top and bottom, make sure that they're even. You want to make sure that you do your fold this way. You do not want to do your fold this way because your foot might grab this as you're going over, and then you'll end up with lumpies and bumpies and all sorts of ugliness. So corners are tucked, top and bottom is ready. So we'll get everything all nice and straight, and we will continue our sewing. Okay, needle down. We have our corner nicely made. And go ahead and grab your fabric. Keep that needle down, lift up your foot and make your turn. Put your foot back down. Make sure you take your needle out and just keep sewing. So there's your nice pretty corner, and you are going to continue to do that around the entire blanket or when you run out of trim, which is what's going to happen to me. I actually needed 2 packages of this trim, but in just a minute when I get there I will show you how to connect the two. Okay, here you can see we have reached the end of our satin trim, so I am going to start a new piece. We have the rough edge here. I've sewn all the way to the end with my back stitch, sealed that down. What we're gonna do when we start the next one is you're just gonna fold this over, fold the end over, and then fold the fabric back in half along its crease line, and then you just set that right over this. Again, you can pin it if you want to. this is a little tricky. If you don't get it right the first time, no big deal. My fabric is super duper thick, so I don't know how well a pin is going to work here, but I think we got it. Now, I'm not sure if you can see, there's just a little tail sticking out here from where I folded it. That's really not a big deal. I can always go back and trim that off later. But the same concept applies to if you are ending your trim and connecting the two. All you would just do simply is, you know, say that my end is right here. You know, you just take the end of your trim, fold it over, and place it overlapping your next bit of trim, and that would be how you would end it. So once you have finished putting this all the way around the blanket, making your pretty corners and overlapping your trim, that's it. You are done with your blanket. And I think this is going to look fabulous. Alright, here we are at the end of our trim. We are about to merge the two sections. I just wanted to cover this real quick in case I lost anybody or did not explain it very well in the last clip. So what I am going to do first is trim off my excess. So that will cover nicely. I am going to fold it so there are no rough edges and place it over the front and the back. And I'm going to hold on to that and keep sewing. Alrighty. And now they are merged together. And after all of our hard work and super long video, which I apologize for, here is our finished product. Here is one of the merged areas. Here's one of our nice corners. Back of the blanket. Here's the front of the blanket. And yes, I think it turned out very nicely. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you, and I really hope that you enjoy the blanket that you make.